Welcome to In the Spotlight. I'm Abigail Pogrobin. Amir Tibon is a diplomatic correspondent for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. He covers Israel's foreign policy with an emphasis on the U.S.-Israel relationship and Middle East diplomacy. From 2017 to 2020, he was the Washington, D.C. correspondent for Haaretz, covering the Trump administration, Congress, and the U.S. Jewish community. Amir's writing on Israel and the Middle East has appeared in The Atlantic, Foreign Affairs, Politico magazine, The New Republic, The Huffington Post, and The Jerusalem Report. He is the co-author of The Last Palestinian, a biography of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, published in July 2017. His most recent book, which we're going to talk about today, is called The Gates of Gaza, a story of betrayal, survival, and hope in Israel's borderlands, published in September 2024. It describes his family's harrowing ordeal on October 7th as residents of Kibbutz Nahal Oz and the bravery that ultimately led to their rescue. Welcome to the broadcast, Amir. It's really good to see you.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So for those who somehow have missed this unbelievable story of where you were on October 7th and just how all this begins, which obviously leads to this very powerful book, can you just give us a sense of the landscape, where you were living, who you were with?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on the show. And I am part of a community called Kibbutz Nahal Oz. Kibbutz is like a small village. I'm sure most of your viewers are aware. And along the border between Israel and Gaza, there are 20 kibbutzim, small communities, mostly agricultural. And I moved to one of those communities, Kibbutz Nahal Oz, in 2014, together with Miri, my wife. We had been living in Tel Aviv before that, and we wanted to move to the Gaza border area because the communities there after the war of 2014 were in a difficult situation, specifically Nahal Oz, which is the closest community to Gaza. It's right on the border with Gaza, 800 meters from the border fence. They were really in need of young people to move there and help strengthen the community.
But explain that just a little bit before you get to get any further. I think people don't necessarily understand the choice to live so close to a people that doesn't necessarily want you there. That became kind of a mission. That became kind of an orientation.
What you just said is the history of Zionism. Choice to go and live in an area where we're not necessarily wanted. That doesn't mean we should not strive for peace and hope and work to improve our ties with all our neighbors and eventually get to a place where everybody can get along. But the very essence of Zionism is to have a Jewish state in the land of Israel, and that this state needs to have strong, secure borders. And communities like Nahal Oz on Israel's borders are a big part of that.
So when you say your decision to move there, though, how do you weigh the risks when you make that when you made that decision? What were the risks for people who don't know what it was like to live that close?
Well, when you live in a place like Nahal Oz, there are two factors that have to be taken into consideration. Number one, there's no Iron Dome. Iron Dome is irrelevant because it is so close to Gaza that Iron Dome cannot protect this community. Number two, when a rocket or a mortar from Gaza is fired at the kibbutz, you have 5 seconds to reach shelter.
Wow.
It's not for everybody, but it's a beautiful place. It's a very strong and loving community. And a lot of the people who live there share this sense of a mission, being there, protecting the border, holding on to the land. And we found ourselves members of that community. And through the years when we lived there, we experienced many security situations and some difficult moments, but nothing ever prepared us for what happened on October 7th. Because during the years, there were rockets launched to the community, mortars from Gaza. At one time, there was a threat of anti-tank missiles from Gaza being fired at cars. These are all things that are done from a distance. October 7, what happened is our kibbutz, like many other communities on the border, was basically conquered by Hamas. And for many, many long hours, was under the control of the enemy.
You woke up, was it 6 a.m. you heard rocket fire?
6:30 in the morning, there was a barrage of mortars fired directly at our neighborhood, falling around our house. And we were in bed, my wife and I, and we ran to what we call the safe room. In every one of these homes on the border with Gaza, there's a small room built of thick concrete that is supposed to protect you from rockets and mortars. And most families choose that room to be the children's bedroom. Because then if there's a barrage of mortars at 6:30 in the morning, the parents have to run to the children and not the other way around. So that's what we did. We ran to the safe room. Our two daughters, 3.5 and 2 years old, were sleeping there. They didn't wake up from all the noise because having been born and raised in Nahal Oz, they're used to it. And we barricaded ourselves in the safe room, believing this was another one of those rounds of fighting between Israel and Hamas that include rockets and, cross-border fire. We didn't expect anything like what that day would soon become, which is again a day when Hamas basically invaded and took over our community.
And when you learned, and I know we're not going to tell it all because people should buy the book, and it's riveting, it is shattering, it is hard to read, but also beautifully written.
Thank you.
That you are a journalist for Haaretz and an Arab speaker, and you speak Arabic. So
Yes.
Were you functioning, I know you were functioning as a father, were you also sort of absorbing this as a journalist? Were you contacting the people at the paper, sources?
Well, when we started hearing gunfire in the community, I did speak to one of my colleagues at Haaretz, Mos Harel, the military analyst for the paper, who, by the way, is the only journalist in Israel who warned a week before October 7th that something like this was going to happen.
Wow.
The only one. Most of the reporters were trusting the government line, Netanyahu's line, the military's line, that we got Gaza under control. And he was raising a red flag. But anyway, I did try to talk to him. I did try to talk to other people, but the situation was hectic. Nobody really understood what was happening. And we had 5 terrorists surrounding our house while we were inside with the girls. The door was locked, and they were trying to break in. And they were firing bullets into our living room.
Wow. And the door was locked for the home. Was the door locked for the safe house? For the safe room?
No, the safe room cannot be locked from the inside.
So were you holding the door, or you just...
Yes.
And meanwhile, you reach your father, who is obviously the hero of heroes in this story, and he
one of many heroes I write about in the book, but definitely yes. I called my parents. They are 62 years old. They live in Tel Aviv, which is about an hour and 10 minutes away from the border area. I informed them of the situation, and after trying to reach some contacts in the military, because my father is a retired high-ranking military officer, but none of his contacts answered him. My parents just took a pistol and started driving themselves toward Nahal Oz.
And that's very like them, right? I mean, obviously you know your parents better than anybody. Is that characteristic, to just get in the car with a gun?
Yes, definitely yes, but it was a very dangerous choice that they made. And I think it was a choice that grew out of an understanding that the situation was not under control, that the military was not controlling what was happening on the border, and that something very, very bad was happening.
And I should have mentioned your mother as well, because she is beyond another hero in this story. As they encountered horrific scenes, they didn't just continue to their son and daughter-in-law and grandchildren. They stopped to help others. Can you just give us a sense of what that journey was like?
Well, along the way, they had to stop more than once to help other people and basically prioritize their lives over the continuation of the journey toward us, because they just saw people who needed urgent, life-saving help. And this included people who had escaped from the Nova Music Festival and had their car ambushed and destroyed by terrorists and needed someone to rescue them, which ended up being the role of my parents. It included wounded soldiers who had received bullets and shrapnel in a battle with Hamas and needed urgent medical care, and eventually were evacuated by my mother to the hospital, and that really saved their lives. And they did all this. And again, I write about it in the book at length, but the issue here really is a question of values. at the end of the day? Do you say, you know, I just have to save my family and I'm putting everything else aside? Or do you say, I'm trying to reach my family, but if I have to help someone else along the way, I will help them? And they chose the second option.
So from the
And
moment,
by the way, we're in close contact today with those people that they had saved, and we met them,
amazing.
and we became friends with them, and it's a connection that will continue for the rest of our lives.
It's incredible. Just so people understand, from the moment that your parents leave their house and they get in their car to when your father actually reaches you, how many hours is that?
Almost 10 hours.
And in the meantime, 10 hours.
Almost 10 hours.
And almost 10
almost
hours
10
where
hours.
you don't have food, you don't have water, you're trying to keep a
You don't have
3-year-old.
electricity, basically, which was,
So
the most
your
difficult
phone
thing was
is,
there
you
was
don't
no,
have phone service for a lot of it.
yep,
The kids
yep.
don't have water to drink. I just can't imagine. I'm thinking about a 3 and a
We
5-year. You had a little bit of water, a tiny bit of water.
we had a little bit of water that we could share between us. We had no food, no electricity, no entertainment, and we had to be quiet because there were terrorists around the house and there were looters who had come in from Gaza to steal, and you didn't really know. Some of them came to steal a television, and some of them came to steal a car, and some of them along the way would be happy to steal a Jew.
Right.
So you really had to be quiet the entire time, which was the main challenge with the girls. But my wife was a huge hero, and the girls as well. And we
Incredible.
managed somehow stay quiet. And I describe in the book our dialogue with the girls, how we explained it to them, what they were asking us.
And how you
I'm
needed
very
to
proud
stay
of it.
calm. You and Miri needed to somehow not betray what you were facing, or it would agitate them and be risky.
I believe that children, they don't really care what the adults say. They look at what the adults do.
Mm.
And if we had been telling them, oh, we have to be quiet, but our behavior would give out stress and panic, the girls probably would have started crying because the whole situation is stressful enough by itself. There is, sounds of bullets crashing on the walls of the house, shouting in Arabic outside the window, total darkness. We had to really, really show them that we were calm, that we were reserved, that if they stay quiet, it's going to be okay.
So when
And they listened.
when your father actually came, it's become a famous line. But can you
Yes.
tell the viewers?
Yeah. So after a long journey in which my parents had to stop many times and help other people, eventually my father reached our kibbutz. He joined a group of soldiers from the Maglan unit, one of the best units of the IDF that had begun scanning homes in the kibbutz, and he joined them. They scanned together all the area of our neighborhood, house by house, go knock on the doors, tell the families the IDF is here, you're safe, you can go out. Eventually, around 4 p.m., they also arrived to our house, and he knocked on the window of the safe room, and that's when Galia, our 3.5-year-old at the time, my older daughter, she said, Saba egia, grandfather is here.
Amazing.
And it was a very emotional moment. We opened the door for the first time. He came in, the soldiers came in, we hugged, we gave the girls food, we gave the soldiers food because they are, they had left their house at 7 in the morning and it was now 4 p.m. They hadn't had anything to eat all day, these soldiers. And then our home became somewhat of like a headquarters. They began to bring neighbors from other homes to our house, so everybody would be under one roof. And those were very exciting moments. I write about it in the book, but also very difficult moments because we began to hear the stories of what all of our friends and neighbors had gone through and who is dead and who is missing, later turned out to be kidnapped. So it
And
was a
those
very, very
stories,
difficult evening.
and those stories, it seems like you're not just living them, but reporting them in the book is to kind of unravel all of the members of the kibbutz who, lived through what. And it's extremely difficult to read. I know we're running out of time, but you go back and forth between the history of Nahal Oz in a really fascinating way, which kind of gives the history of these kibbutzim on the Gaza border. But also you're tough on the government and you're tough on kind of how we got here. Can you just give us a sense, just as a journalist and as someone who went through this, what is your perspective on how this could have been foreseen or handled differently?
Well, first of all, I can only write the facts, which is what I did. we also need to draw conclusions. And what we need most urgently in Israel right now is, first of all, a deal to bring back the hostages alive, because they are running out of time and they are dying in great agony. The women are being raped, the men are being tortured every day, and we need a deal to bring them back. And the second thing that we need is what we call Va'adat Chakira Mamlachtit, a national commission of inquiry. This is the most powerful instrument in the Israeli rulebook for investigating failures of the state. We had such a commission after the Yom Kippur War in 73. We had such a commission after the murder of Yitzhak Rabin in 95. We had one after the Meron stampede a few years ago when more than 40 people were killed in the biggest civilian disaster in Israeli history. And we definitely need one for October 7, which is the most terrible day in the history of the state of Israel. And this commission will have to look at all the tough questions that you raised. Where was the military? What was the government doing? Why did we give Hamas money all these years? Did we know what they were doing with that money? How did the intelligence failure happen? Were intelligence resources diverted away from Gaza to other arenas? Did we underestimate Hamas? Why didn't we listen when Hamas leaders on television, not in secret phone calls, on television, said we will flood Israel with our soldiers? All these questions have to be answered. I can only report what's happened. We need this commission to investigate it and really be truthful with everyone, the government, the military, the intelligence, previous governments. This is not because we're looking for a blame or, God forbid, revenge, but because we have to make sure it never happens again.
Okay.
And if we don't investigate how it happened and draw the conclusions, it could happen again in the future, which is something we should all aspire to never, ever allow, never again in the state of Israel or anywhere else.
So finally, Amir, because I know I have to let you go, you are obviously not living home anymore. It's a question of whether you
temporarily relocated, all of
Yes,
us, the
all
entire
of you.
community.
So I just have to ask, you went through one of the most terrifying experiences anyone can imagine, particularly for a young parent. How do you replay it constantly? Is it something just for those of us to understand? And I'm sure it's different for everyone, the post-traumatic impact.
We all suffer from this. That includes me. For me, writing the book, The Gates of Gaza, was a way to deal with that, because I felt that the way for me feel that I am doing something and that I'm being of use is to write the story and share it far and wide. And I wrote the book in English. The English edition is the original version of this book. I later translated it myself into Hebrew. It has also been translated into German and French and other languages. And my motivation is to let the world know what happened so that nobody can deny, nobody can minimize, nobody can try to erase this from the memory. It's difficult, but it has been my mission ever since I began writing it.
Thank you. Amir Tibon, the book is The Gates of Gaza, a story of betrayal, survival, and hope in Israel's borderlands. Thank you for being with us, and I wish your family safety and health.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Take care. I'm Abigail Pogrebin for
toda.
In the Spotlight. Thank you for joining us. I'll see you next time.